Have a long day. We're completely knocked out.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Carlos Jimenez, and I'm going to be giving you a presentation today on the company Hennessy. Anything is possible, so I like to believe. Starting with our table of context, we have our overview, our company background, issues, possible solutions, our decision criteria, our options, and obviously at the very end, we have our recommendation. That being said, let's move forward with the overview of the spirit. So cognac dates to all the way back in the 16th century when Dutch settlers who brought it to France were looking for something to be able to take home back while they were Dutch settlers. Formerly known as eau de vie, a colorless fruit brandy. Cognac, like champagne, is very unique and only allowed to be made in a specific region of France known as the Cognac region. Uniquely made from special grapes, essentially wine distilled at a much higher ABV. Now, in terms of company background, the company was established during the reign of King Louis XV. Originally, the company name was Hennessy Trading Company. Later on, the name did change. Established and built by an aristocratic-born man by the name of Richard Hennessy. The company of French origin, established in 1724, did take place of establishment in the county of Cork, otherwise now known as the Cognac region. In 1794, the first shipments of Hennessy arrived in the United States or America, right? The company is also associated with the luxury giant Louis Vuitton and Moet Hennessy, which is also known as Moet Chandon, which are also under the same family as LVMH. Now, I did mention there were company issues, and although this is a very, very large alcoholic beverage conglomerate, which has many different spirits underneath its wing, it does face some issues that could potentially result in the downfall of the company if they do not pay close attention to it. That being said, COVID affected the company in many aspects, although I will be talking about three in particular today: supply, demand, and production, which obviously, are the major portions of the production side of the company. Demand has officially begun to beat out the rate of production, which in any case is always very dangerous, but also does something known as inflation of price, and it drives up the price, making it less affordable for those who, aren't exactly what they would call economically privileged. Now, possible and feasible solutions. There are many ways that you could go ahead and tackle some of these problems. One of them would be investment in greenhouse technologies with artificial climate control. UC Davis actually takes part in a lot of these major research development areas. They do currently supply Gallo wines, which is also a very large alcoholic conglomerate, with a lot of solutions with some of their production problems, actually. Larger storage base for cask and future vintages to be released. That's also another solution that many wineries, even on a small scale, take into consideration and do on a regular basis. Lift certain restrictions to allow for more crop production in similar regions to that of the Cognac region in France. Now, I understand that could possibly open up for a lot of, counterfeit productions being made, but if regulated properly and they have the correct attention, anything, or like I like to say, anything is definitely possible. Now, the decision criteria that I will be making or suggesting the solutions, right, will be the pros and cons of the solution, obviously, cost effectiveness versus the outcomes, and crop control and rotation in present and future harvests. As many ancient farming techniques did rely very heavily on crop rotation, which in turn resulted in much heavier crop yields, but we'll get more into that in the next couple slides. Now, greenhouse technologies. Now, there are a lot of pros, just how there are other cons, right? It allows for crops to be grown regardless of weather conditions, allow for better yield, and more than anything, it has controlled irrigation, considering that now we are facing what's called a water shortage. And there's also less water waste. A lot of the greenhouses, they have a reservoir system within the greenhouse that allows them to recycle a lot of the water, and it does go through a filtration process. Now, the cons are that obviously, things cost money, and COVID made a lot of prices go up. They can be extremely expensive. The film or the panels that protect the greenhouse and maintain a stable temperature inside need to be replaced almost every 5 to 10 years. So the half-life isn't exactly what you would call very, big. Regulations may not allow for certain structures to be built in, a historical region. It is a historical region, so a lot of property taxes aren't actually paid that should be paid, but because it is considered a historical region, they, don't get charged. Now, building of extra storage bays. Again, it has its pros and its cons. Allows for more barrels to be aged at once. Shortage storages can be increased, meaning it'll keep a steady flow of production and of product readily available for any sort of potential hazards that may occur, similar to COVID-19. The premium spirit put out can be increased, meaning, in other words, say we only produce, say, 50,000 barrels this season, right, to be aged. You could take out some of the storage and release an extra 10,000, which, in turn can help drive the costs down a little bit, right? Making it much more affordable for those who really like to partake in enjoying of the spirit. Now, the cons, obviously, things cost money. Building restrictions due to the location of the facility. Historical location does not allow for building in the immediate area. And again, because it is a historic region, it can be very expensive to pull out any sort of permits for building. It can get difficult, and there's usually a lot of politics involved, and different points of view usually make things, for example, the building of extra storage bays, like we're saying now, very difficult in the future. Crop control. Now, crop control tends to be a very controversial topic for many people who, specifically the people who work in agriculture and, farmers more than anything, because a lot of regulation makes it difficult nowadays for farmers to really make a profit. But that being said, rotation allows for more fertile soil and better harvest. Keeping all of the rotten grape back into the soil helps produce higher level contents of nutrients within the soil, which in turn allows for a better grape, right? The quality of fruit is improved drastically, and the non-depletion of soil and its mineral content. Now, the grape can be a very, very, very greedy plant, and it does long-term destroy the soil in which it's being produced in, which is why crop rotation would allow for different soils to replenish over time. Obviously the life of vines tends to be a little bit long, but once those vines are done, many places like France, for example, in the wine industry, they mulch the vines that are now dying and throw it back into the soil to help replenish a lot of the mineral content and the nutrients. Now, the cons. Standby time for proper rotation can affect levels of productivity if not done properly. Seasonal dependence, meaning the weather doesn't always permit for the best crop rotation, let alone sometimes demand is a lot higher. So you have to really use up all the soil that you have. And weather patterns, again, also affect soil volume, meaning sometimes it's too wet. Grapes, specifically the ones that they use for cognac, there are certain levels of, water that they like and certain levels of water that they don't like. The grape is a very delicate plant. It's a woody stem creature, and in order to be able to produce the maximum amount of grapes without having destroying the plant can become very difficult. And in France, since it's one of those things where watering vines is not something that's necessarily allowed, right? They only depend on what's actually produced by the environment, the water, the rain, then, it gets a little difficult at times. Now, the recommendations that I'm giving are based on research and a couple of other resources that I've looked up, and UC Davis does play a big factor here. Investing in greenhouse technology and installing in certain areas where weather is very volatile and water is scarce. Again, greenhouses permit this. In the United States, greenhouse technology is used, and particularly in the Midwest, where the weather isn't exactly what you would say permitting for a lot of agricultural product. The building of additional storage units outside of the immediate distillery within 50 miles or so of the distillery in the countryside could also be a very, very good choice. Keeping the product as close as possible so that you can produce what you need when you need it always makes things a lot easier, and as well can help drive price down. And when prices go down, people tend to buy more. And I'd rather sell one product for $1 to 1 million people rather than one product for $1 million. That's just the way that I see it. Now, crop crossing and genetic manipulation to yield a more drought tolerant and cold tolerant grapes, those are something that bioengineering can really come into play. There's a lot of vegetables nowadays that have been genetically engineered to be able to yield a higher crop and be more resistant to drought or the cold, which recently in the cognac region has been a very big problem. And cold in particularly has caused a lot of the crops to go down because the frost really kills the grape. And mulching old grapevines back into the soil where they were tilled from to return some of the nutrient content back into the soil to maintain the fertility and the pH, which really affects the plant's ability to fixate nitrogen back into the plant. When the pH is too high, they can't do that. And as a result of it, the soil tends to become acidic and you can't grow anything in acidic soil. So these would be some of the recommendations that, I very much suggest towards, Hennessy to potentially try to apply back into their system, which I believe will lead not only to a much more secure and steady source of product, but long-term will also increase their storage, which makes them much more resistant to any sort of shortage that could happen in the near future had maybe anything like COVID-19 ever hit again, because we can't control pandemics, but we can control the level of supply that we have in storage in case of emergencies. In conclusion, the expansion of the storage warehousing will allow for less problems with shortages, establishing a better supply chain outside of the immediate area, allowing different regions to grow a similar product, and particularly the raw product necessary to get the finished product, which would be the Hennessy cognac. Funding greenhouse projects to better cope with environmental factors, which in long term would actually impact the environment more positively because you're leaving less of a carbon footprint. Now, partnering up with universities like Davis to help better crop productions, again, and I hate to mention them once more, but Gaia Wines has been very good about doing this. Most of their advancements in agriculture have been because they partnered up with a university like Davis, which are very much focused on agricultural research, putting your money and your time and giving it to somebody who's already advanced in something, and particularly in this area of science, can be very helpful to a company like, the LVMH group, where they have not only the Hennessy, but they also have, the champagnes that they produce, Armagnac de Brignac. Those are all companies that are also facing potential shortages, which they now weren't potential, now they're actual shortages. And I believe that reaching out to resources like what Davis has to offer would be a great option, and not only better planning for the future, but helping prevent any sort of shortages in the near future and distant future. That concludes my presentation for today. These are my references. If you wish to have, any conversations or any possible questions, feel free to let me know, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. That being said, my name is Carlos Jimenez, and this is my presentation. Have a good evening. All right.